Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world that smells of sweat, dust, and iron. Ancient Rome, where gladiators are both admired and pitied, cheered on by roaring crowds, yet bound in chains of fate. You think your Monday mornings are rough? Imagine waking up not to an inbox of emails, but to a recruiter pointing at you and saying, "Congratulations. You're going to fight for your life in front of 50,000 strangers." Trust me, you wouldn't last a day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where and when you're listening. Are you tucked in at midnight or stealing a nap at noon? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The beginning of your story isn't glamorous. You're not a volunteer driven by ambition, but rather a body caught in the net of Rome's vast empire. Maybe you were a soldier captured in a border skirmish, or a thief unlucky enough to be noticed. Chains on your wrists and dust on your face. You were marched into a courtyard where other men huddle, eyes darting like cornered animals. You smell the tang of iron, not just from weapons nearby, but from fear itself, sweat thick in the summer air, mixed with dust that scratches your throat. The recruiter doesn't bother asking your dreams. He looks at you the way a farmer inspects. A mule measuring your shoulders, tapping your arm, deciding if you'll break quickly or last long enough to make the crowd cheer. Common knowledge says most gladiators were slaves or criminals. But here's the twist. Some desperate free men actually volunteered. Yes, they signed contracts to give up their freedom, betting on the chance of fame or maybe the faint possibility of prize money. That's like signing up for a reality show where the losing contestant doesn't just go home embarrassed, they go home on a stretcher. As you stand in the line, you hear whispers of the word Lanista. This is the man who now owns you, the trainer, the broker, the businessman of blood. He buys you as if you were a loaf of bread at the market, and he has all the paperwork, stamped and sealed by Rome itself, ensuring that your body, your sweat, and even your screams are now his property. It's strange, isn't it? Rome, a society that built aqueducts and roads lasting millennia, also perfected the art of turning human suffering into entertainment. Historians still debate whether these recruitments were purely about punishment, or also a way to give the restless poor a role to play in Rome's grand circus of control. Either way, the result for you is the same. Your new life begins with a branding of identity, not in ink or parchment, but in scars and bruises. You're herded toward the gates of a training school, the ludus, a compound that smells of old sweat, sour wine, and the faint metallic sting of weapons sharpened for practice. The walls are high, as if the very bricks are reminding you that escape isn't part of the curriculum. Your heart thuds against your ribs, not the excited flutter of anticipation, but the dull hammering of a trapped bird. You're given a tunic, rough and scratchy, and for the first time you realize that whatever name you once had out there in the city means very little here. Inside these walls, you were just another body in the making, clay to be molded into a fighter or to be broken in the attempt. And yet, there's a strange paradox. Some men shuffle into this place with hollow eyes, already half dead in spirit. Others march in with a crooked smile, convinced that they will be the rare one to win. Not just survival, but celebrity. You feel yourself pulled between both poles, terror gnawing your gut, but a flicker of defiance in your chest, whispering that maybe, just maybe, you can survive the sand. The first night, sleep does not come easily. the snores of other recruits echo against the walls, a ragged chorus of fear disguised as rest. You lie awake on a straw mat that pricks your skin, staring at the wooden beams above you. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the muffled laughter of Romans in a tavern, free men spilling wine and stories, while you stare into darkness. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and damp straw, and you roll onto your side, wishing for a pillow, a blanket, or even the familiar scent of your old life. But here, the only lullaby is the faint clatter of a guard's sandals pacing outside. You close your eyes, but instead of dreams, images haunt you, an arena you haven't yet seen, crowds you haven't yet faced, and weapons you haven't yet lifted. Tomorrow, the training begins. And in Rome, training is not preparation, it's survival, rehearsed under the weight of endless eyes. Morning comes too quickly. The guards bang, the doors open, and the straw mat beneath you feels like it's trying to hold you back, whispering, "Stay here, at least here you're alive." But you're pulled into the courtyard, sunlight already hot on your skin, dust swirling like a second cloak. This is your first taste of training, and let me tell you, it isn't glamorous. You're not handed a shining sword or polished armor. No, what you get is a thick wooden stick rough, splintering at the edge of sand, told to swing it until your arms feel like boiled noodles. Here's the part everyone knows. Gladiators trained endlessly with wooden weapons before ever touching real steel. Why? Because real swords were expensive, and breaking one during practice was like smashing a brand new iPhone on day one. Wood was safer for the trainers' wallets, if not for your aching muscles. The Lannister's philosophy was simple. If you can survive being beaten half to death with wood, you might stand a chance with iron. And here's the lesser-known detail. Some of those wooden swords, the rudies, weren't just for practice. They were also symbols of freedom. If a gladiator survived long enough, and, let's be real, that was as rare as finding Wi-Fi in the Colosseum, he might be awarded a finely carved wooden sword, a sign he was free to walk away. Imagine that. The same object that bruised your ribs daily could one day mean your ticket out. It's almost poetic if you ignore the splinters. The drills themselves are punishing. You're marched in circles, ordered to swing until your shoulders scream, forced to pair off with other recruits, in endless bouts that look more like flailing than fighting. Sweat soaks through your tunic, the air fills with grunts and curses, and your legs start trembling before the day is half over. Every swing of the wooden blade feels heavier, as though the thing is secretly made of lead. You wonder if this is training or just an elaborate prank. Spoiler, it's both. And the instructors, they're not gentle motivators. They bark at you, spit on the ground, crack whips for emphasis. You're not praised for effort, you're mocked for weakness. If you trip, the others laugh, because laughing is safer than showing sympathy. If you falter, the trainer yells about how the crowd will eat you alive, and you believe him, because in this place, the crowd isn't metaphoricalized. 1,000 Romans with an appetite for drama. Historians still debate how much of this training was about building true skill versus simply breaking spirits into obedience. Were gladiators crafted into professionals, or just battered into desperation? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the dusty middle. But for you, the effect is clear. Every swing, every bruise, every drop of sweat is part of your transformation, from random person into human spectacle. Of course, even misery has its comic side. The man next to you sneezes from all the dust, drops his wooden sword, and immediately gets smacked for it. You can't help thinking, "Bless you" might be the most dangerous phrase in this courtyard. Another recruit tries to show off with a flashy spin, only to trip and faceplant into the dirt. The laughter rings out like children at recess. Except here, recess involves shouting instructors and the constant possibility of broken bones. And then there's you, clinging to your wooden sword like it's both your worst enemy and your only lifeline. By midday, your tunic clings to you, sweat dripping down your spine, dust plastered to your arms and legs. The sun beats overhead mercilessly, and every breath tastes like sand. You collapse onto the ground when given a break, the wood still in your grip, your hands raw and blistering. The water offered is warm, barely enough to quench your thirst, and yet you gulp it like it's nectar of the gods. In the evening, when the drills finally relent, you stagger back to the barracks. Your muscles twitch with exhaustion, and every movement sends a ripple of pain through your body. Yet, strangely, you notice something. You've survived the first day. And though your arms feel like jelly and your back burns, you realize that tomorrow you'll rise again, because here, rest is not a luxury, it's just the intermission between battles. As night settles in, you lie once more on that straw mat, its prickly embrace somehow less offensive now that you're too tired to care. Around you, other recruits groan, curse, or snore like broken instruments. You close your eyes, wood still aching in your grip, and drift toward uneasy sleep. Tomorrow, the drills will continue, and soon the stakes will rise, not just wood against wood, but flesh against steel, when barbers and surgeons blur their lines in ways you'll wish you never saw. Sleep never lasts long. Dawn seeps through the cracks in the barrack walls, and the gruff shout of a guard drags you back into the waking world. Your body feels like it has been borrowed by someone clumsy and then returned broken, every muscle stiff, every joint sore, and yet there's no mercy. You shuffle in line with the other recruits toward the Ludus, the Gladiator school, where discipline reigns like a second set of chains. Here's the part everyone knows. Gladiator schools will run like prisons. High walls, barred gates, guards. At every turn, you weren't just free to stroll out for an afternoon nap under an olive tree. Once inside, you belonged to the lanista, the master of the school, and he treated you like an investment. Not a student, not even a soldier, just a body with a price tag. The less obvious truth is that these schools weren't all endless whips and chains. Some Lanistae actually made sure gladiators ate better than the average Roman laborer. Why? Because a dead fighter earned nothing but a well-fed, muscled showpiece brought in coin and cheers. So, while peasants outside scraped by on thin gruel, you're handed barley, porridge, beans, bread, sometimes even meat. Congratulations, you've basically upgraded to the ancient Roman version of a high-protein diet. Except, with the small downside of eventually being stabbed for entertainment. Your daily routine is carved in stone: drills, sparring, conditioning, lectures from trainers who once fought in the arena themselves. The lanista walks among you, arms folded, eyes sharp, inspecting like a merchant choosing grapes at market. If you lag, he snaps. If you slack, he orders punishment. His voice cuts through the air as cleanly as a sword. You quickly learn theirs. No such thing as taking it easy. Even leaning on a wall too long earns you a glare. And the punishments, they're creative. Some involve being forced to carry heavy stones across the yard. Others make you stand in awkward poses until your legs wobble like stilts. It's less about cruelty more about control. The lanista wants obedience drilled into your bones as firmly as sword practice. You don't get to question orders here, you just obey. Historians still debate whether Lannister were seen as villains or necessary professionals. To the public, they often carried a shady reputation, their trade considered disreputable, but within the school, they were absolute authority, part coach, part prison warden, part accountant. Imagine your high school principal, your drill sergeant, and your tax auditor rolled into one, and you'll start to understand the joy of living under a Lannister's roof. Still, not everything is despair. There are moments of grim camaraderie. You and the other recruits share jokes in whispers, laugh at each other's blunders during training, and sometimes sneak an extra scrap of bread from the kitchens. A fellow trainee might grin and mutter, "Better to die full than starve pretty." You laugh, even though the joke lands uncomfortably close to truth. Another time, one guy trips carrying a practice shield and topples like a turtle flipped on its back. Everyone snickers, even the trainer, though he hides it behind a cough. Humor becomes survival here, a way to remind yourselves you're still human. One surprising detail most people wouldn't expect: gladiator schools weren't purely Roman. Some Lannister hired Greek or even foreign instructors, bringing in different fighting styles and philosophies. You might find yourself drilled in techniques from across the empire: Thracian twists, Gallic lunges, Greek grappling. This wasn't just about swinging swords. It was a mashup of combat cultures, like a violent version of an international cooking class. Evenings in the Ludus don't bring freedom. After training, you're herded back into the barracks, locked in for the night. The air is thick with sweat, the straw mats smell faintly of mold, and snores echo like a symphony gone wrong. Still, there's a strange sense of safety at least. Tonight, no one is trying to kill you. Some men whisper about their past lives. A soldier dishonored in battle, a thief caught in the act, a slave sold by debt. Others stare silently at the ceiling beams, already lost in thoughts of the arena dot. The walls of the Ludus loom high, their shadows stretching long under the moonlight. You know you're trapped, but you also know you're changing. Every rule, every harsh command, every long day with the wooden sword carves you into something new. You are no longer just yourself, you are a gladiator in the making, bound to the will of the Lannister and the hunger of the crowd. And as you drift toward uneasy sleep, your arms twitch with phantom movements, rehearsing swings even in dreams. Tomorrow, the wooden swords will still wait for you. Tomorrow, the trainers will still shout. Tomorrow, the Lannister will still watch. And in time, you'll step beyond the walls of the school, into the blinding light of the arena, where prayers and pestilence walk hand in hand with the crowds. Roaring appetite morning drills leave your arms heavy, your stomach hollow, and your patience stretched thinner than a cheap Roman sandal strap. When the Lannister finally signals the end, you and the others stumble toward the dining hall. No silver platters, no roasted peacocks, no grapes delicately peeled by attendants. Instead, waiting for you is the steady, predictable fuel of a gladiator: barley, porridge, beans, and a jug of sour wine that tastes a little like regret. Here's the common fact everyone knows: gladiators were often called Horderi the barley men. The nickname wasn't an insult, exactly. It was just a reflection of your diet. Barley was cheap, filling, and thought to build strong, heavy bodies suited for fighting. Mixed with beans, it gave you the bulk and stamina to survive hours of training or the endless wait before stepping into the arena. It was ancient carb loading before anyone invented the term. Now, here's the detail most people wouldn't expect. Gladiators intentionally ate a diet that packed on fat. That soft layer wasn't laziness, was protection. A bit of belly or bulk meant a cut might not go as deep, or that the opponent's sword might glance off instead of piercing something vital. Imagine being applauded for having a gladiator gut. You'd basically be the original poster child for body positivity. Forget abs. In the arena, cushioning could save your life. The meals themselves are far from glamorous. You ladle the porridge into a clay bowl, the steam rising in curls that smell earthy and faintly sour. The beans are seasoned, if you're lucky, with a pinch of salt or herbs. The sour wine, diluted with water, stings your tongue but quenches thirst in a way plain water often can't. Romans didn't always trust fresh water. Too easy for it to carry sickness. So the sharp bite of vinegar-laced wine became the safer option. You swallow and grimace, and a fellow trainee nudges you with a grin. Don't worry, the taste grows on you, like mold. You laugh, though it's only half a joke. Historians still debate just how carefully this diet was designed. Was it a deliberate training regimen, calculated by Lannister to maximize performance? Or was it simply the cheapest way to feed large groups of fighters while convincing them it was for their own good? The truth may lie somewhere between economy and strategy, with practicality wrapped in a veneer of nutritional wisdom. As you eat, you notice how quickly the hall falls into a rhythm. The clatter of bowls, the scrape of spoons, the low hum of voices. Some men gulp their food in silence, as if afraid it might vanish. Others stretch out the meal with slow bites, savoring every bean as though it were a delicacy. One joker raises his bowl of porridge like a goblet and toasts to another day of being deliciously average. The laughter ripples through the room, and for a moment, the harshness of the ludus softens. But this food is more than just fuel. It becomes part of your identity. The barley men label follows you beyond the walls, whispered by spectators who crowd the amphitheater. They point and cheer, knowing that the thick muscles and rounder bodies of gladiators are forged from simple grains and legumes. You are not feasting like an emperor, but you are being built into something equally commanding. A spectacle of strength. The smell of the hall lingers even after you leave. Grain, sweat, damp stone. The air outside feels fresher, sharper, and you carry the heaviness of your meal back into the yard. Training resumes, and the barley in your belly settles like a stone, weighing you down during drills. But you remind yourself that this heaviness is a tool, a shield in its own way. In the sand of the arena, the softness might mean the difference between a scar and a fatal wound, and yet you dream of more. On quiet nights, you imagine roasted meats, sweet figs, honeyed cakes, dripping with syrup. The fantasies make the porridge taste even duller in the morning, but they also remind you of what you lack. In the gladiator school, luxury isn't part of the bargain. Food is not meant to delight you, it is meant to keep you alive, strong, and ready. Still, the act of eating together binds you to the others. Sharing the same bland porridge day after day, you find camaraderie in sameness. You might joke that beans are the true enemies, responsible for more battles in the barracks than any rival gladiator. You laugh, holding your stomach after a particularly raucous evening, thinking maybe this is the one time the Lannister should have rationed more carefully. The sun sets on another day, and the nickname Hoderi clings to you as tightly as the sweat on your skin. Tomorrow, you will eat the same food again, and the day after, and the day after that. It's monotonous, predictable, unchanging and, yet it's what fuels the transformation of men into fighters, bodies into weapons. As you settle back into the barracks, your stomach heavy but strangely satisfied, you realize that every spoonful of barley porridge is a step closer to the arena. Every bean swallowed is part of the contract you never signed but are forced to honor, and when the time comes, the crowd won't cheer for your diet. They'll cheer for the blood, the sweat, the clash of weapons. But for now, it's just you, your bowl, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow's breakfast will taste exactly the same. Your belly still feels heavy from the beans and barley when the Lannister orders you back into the training yard. This time, though, it isn't wooden practice swords. Today, you're introduced to the glittering, intimidating variety of weapons that shape a gladiator's identity. Each type is more than steel and wood, it's practically a costume, a role you're forced to inhabit for the crowd's delight. The most familiar scene, the one everyone recognizes, is the heavily armored Secutor with his short sword and massive shield, facing the lightly equipped Riciarius with his net and trident. It's the ancient version of a mismatched video game fight. Heavy tank versus fast rogue. The crowd loved the contrast, and you can see why one fighter lumbering forward like a battering ram, the other darting around, flinging his net like he's gone fishing in the most violent pond imaginable. Now here's a lesser-known truth. The matchups weren't always random. Gladiators were often assigned roles, not just based on skill, but on physical appearance. If you're tall and lanky, congratulations, more likely to be cast as a Riciarius, dancing around with a trident and a net. If you're broad and stocky, the Lannister hands you a shield nearly the size of a door and calls you a Secutor. It's a little like being typecast in a play, except instead of bad reviews, you risk actual death. The weapons themselves are deceptive. The trident looks theatrical, almost ridiculous, like a prop from a Neptune costume. But in the sand, its 3 prongs can trap and twist an opponent's sword, or drive deep into unprotected flesh, the net. Not some flimsy fishing gear, it's weighted with lead at the edges, designed to tangle legs or yank a helmet sideways. You imagine the audience gasping as a man flails, trapped like a fish, while the Riciarius grins and moves in for the strike. The shield, too, is no easy burden. You heft one now, the curved scutum pressing into your arm. It feels less like protection and more like being chained to a barn door. Swing it up, step forward, and you can almost hear your spine complain. And yet, this unwieldy slab is what keeps a sword from opening your ribs. The Romans weren't subtle. They liked their warriors clashing with the intensity of hammers against anvils. Historians still debate whether these pairings were intended to be balanced contests of skill or orchestrated spectacles with predictable outcomes. Was the nimble net fighter truly expected to beat the shielded brute? Or was the whole setup designed for maximum drama, like stacking the odds in favor of one side, while keeping just enough suspense to make the crowd cheer? As you move through the racks of weapons, you see even more strange tools. The curved seeker, favored by the Thracians, designed to hook around shields. The small, round palmer shield, which looks almost laughable next to the scutum, but forces its wielder to be quick on his feet. Each weapon tells a story about the people who first carried it, from conquered provinces to Rome's heart. You realize gladiators aren't just fighters, they're living symbols of Rome's empire, reenacting conquest and control every time they step into the arena. The Lannister barks orders, shoving weapons into eager or reluctant hands. You're told to try the trident, and immediately feel awkward, like a shepherd holding a very fancy pitchfork. You swing, jab, shuffle, nearly trip over your own feet. The others laugh, and you join in, because what else can you do? You joke that at least you'll be well prepared if Rome suddenly runs out of fishermen. The humor eases the sting of clumsiness, but the weight of the weapon reminds you it's no laughing matter in combat. Nearby, two men practice with nets, their movements almost dance-like. One lunges, the other sidesteps, the leaded cords whipping through the air with a hiss. You duck instinctively, even though you're only watching. Another pair clash shield against shield, the clang echoing across the yard like church bells gone feral. Sweat, dust, and the metallic tang of iron fill your nose, grounding you in the reality of this training. Later, as the sun dips and the air cools, you sit with the others, muscles sore and skin chafed from the weight of armor. Someone complains about the absurdity of carrying a shield bigger than himself. Another mimics the delicate toss of a net, sending the group into laughter. For a moment, the weapons are less tools of death and more shared jokes. Reminders that even in this harsh world, camaraderie slips through, and yet, you can't shake the thought. One day you'll be told which weapon is yours, which style defines your fate. The choice won't be yours to make. The crowd doesn't see your sore arm, your awkward steps, your hidden dread. They see only roles: the fisherman, the juggernaut, the foreigner, the underdog. To them, you're not a man, you're entertainment wrapped in steel and sweat. As night falls, you lie awake on your cot, the shadows of tridents and shields flickering in your mind. Tomorrow, the Lannister will decide again who wields what, and someday soon, those choices will carry you into the arena. Under the roar of thousands, where no one cares whether you prefer beans to barley or shields to nets. They only care whether you win or how spectacularly you lose. The clang of weapons fades as the training yard empties. But your day isn't over, it simply shifts to another kind of battlefield. You shuffle back into the barracks, the air thick with the smell of sweat, damp straw, and the faint tank of oil from greased armor. The space is cramped, rows of wooden cots pushed close together, barely enough room to stretch without bumping elbows. Privacy isn't a luxury here. You live shoulder to shoulder with men who might one day fight beside you against you. Everyone knows the barracks are as much a test of endurance as the arena itself. The common scene is this: fighters lounging on their bunks, sharpening blades that aren't even theirs, swapping stories, or tossing dice with small clay pieces. Laughter bursts out one moment, followed by tense silence the next, as rivalries bubble up like cracks in a wall. You learn quickly that the wrong joke, or even the wrong glance, can turn into a brawl that leaves both men limping at tomorrow's drills. Here's something lesser known. Not every gladiator was a slave or a criminal. Some were volunteers free, men who signed contracts for the thrill, the pay, or the twisted sense of honor. They bunked right alongside the condemned, which made for fascinating gossip. Imagine lying in bed listening to one guy grumble about being chained here for life, while the other brags about how he chose this because farming grapes was too boring. It's not exactly the motivational poster you'd expect above your straw mattress. The barracks hum with constant chatter. Men whisper about which Lannister is cruelest, which fighters are favorites of the crowd, who's secretly planning escape, or who's been promised freedom after just one more fight. Some of it's true, most of it isn't, but gossip is the currency here. You trade stories like others trade coins. It helps you forget the iron bars at the windows, the guards at the doors, and the fact that even your dreams aren't entirely your own. Historians still debate whether these barracks functioned more like military camps or like prisons. Were gladiators drilled with the discipline of soldiers, forming tight-knit bonds? Or were they simply inmates shoved into rooms, left to stew in their own rivalries? The evidence suggests a bit of both, which makes sense. You feel the camaraderie in shared meals and laughter, but also the simmering tension in every sideways glance. You try to stretch out on your cot, but the straw pokes through the thin blanket, and the wooden frame creaks with every breath. A neighbor snores like a broken horn, and someone 2 bunks over is muttering a prayer to Mars, the god of war. You joke quietly to yourself that sleep here is the ultimate gladiatorial challenge. Survive the chorus of snores without losing your sanity. It's a small comfort to realize that in some ways, the mighty fighters of Rome lived just like you do when stuck in a bad hostel with 12 strangers. The food comes again: more beans, more barley, maybe a hunk of bread if you're lucky. The meal is eaten side by side, no tablecloths or silver cups, just wooden bowls and hands scarred from training. One man tells a story about how he once fought a lion and won, though, judging by the laughter and eye rolls, the lion probably looked more like a stray dog. Another man brags about an admirer in the crowd, swearing he caught her throwing flowers just for him. The rest tease him mercilessly, pointing out that she might have just been aiming at the guy behind him. Still, moments of warmth break through. A hand offered to patch up a blister, a shared drink of sour wine, a song sung softly in the dim light. These small gestures are what keep you human when everything else tries to make you feel like a tool, a weapon, or a commodity. For a fleeting moment, you forget the sand and the blood and feel something close to friendship. Yet the rivalries remain sharp. You sense it in the way 2 men sit apart, their eyes locked, neither speaking but both knowing they might meet under the sun of the arena. You realize then that this tension is part of the system. It keeps everyone alert, hungry, restless. The lanista may rule with discipline, but the barracks themselves whisper their own kind of law. As night presses in, the lanterns sputter low, shadows stretch across the walls, and the murmur of voices fades into uneasy quiet. You curl into your blanket, listening to the shuffle of bodies, the coughs in the darkness, the creak of floorboards. Tomorrow will bring drills, bruises, and perhaps new weapons thrust into your hands. But tonight, the barracks are your cage, filled with men who are both comrades and rivals. You close your eyes, trying to rest, but the thought lingers in this place. You don't just fight for survival. In the arena, you fight every moment for space on your cot, for your reputation among your peers, for the fragile scrap of dignity that hasn't yet been stripped away. And somehow, in that suffocating room, you realize that the true battle begins long before the crowd ever sees you. The barracks door creaks open, and daylight slices into the dim, smoky air. A guard barks, and suddenly your legs are moving, carrying you out through narrow stone corridors. The murmurs you heard all morning swell into a thunder, each step toward the light pulling that sound closer until it rattles in your chest. Then, at last, the brightness blinds you, the heat of the sun slaps against your skin, and the sand crunches beneath your sandals. You are standing in the arena for the very first time. Everyone knows the scene, a roaring crowd of thousands, the amphitheater rising around you like a mountain of faces, their cheers colliding into a single tidal wave of noise. You smell the dust kicked up from the sand, mixed with the faint metallic temps of old blood baked into the ground by countless afternoons like this one. The air is alive, heavy with anticipation, and all of it is focused squarely on you. No pressure, right? What most people don't realize is that your debut doesn't always begin with a bloody fight. Often first-timers are pitted in staged battles, mock duels with dulled weapons or against weaker opponents, designed to test your nerves rather than spill your guts. Think of it as a dress rehearsal, except the audience still demands drama, and there's no polite applause if you freeze mid-scene. Instead, the crowd might boo, whistle, or even throw things. Nothing like being judged by an entire city to boost your confidence. You glance upward, squinting past the sunlight. Banners snap in the wind, colored cloths marking the seats of senators and wealthy patrons. Somewhere up there, the editor of the games watches, ready to signal your fate with a flick of his hand. You remind yourself that survival today isn't only about skill, it's about performance. A stumble, a hesitation, even an awkward expression might make the difference between the crowd calling for your release or demanding a second round. Historians still debate whether the first steps into the arena were more terrifying because of the risk of death or because of the overwhelming spectacle itself. Was it the swords and spears that shook your spirit, or the endless sea of eyes demanding that you prove yourself? Either way, you quickly learn that the arena is less a battlefield and more a theater, and you are an unwilling actor cast in a play you never auditioned for. The sun burns hotter as you adjust your grip on the wooden, practice sword handed to you. The handle is slick with sweat, though you're not sure if it's yours or from the man who held it before you. Across the sand, another fighter waits, shifting his weight nervously. You can tell by his stance that he's just as green as you are. For a brief, ridiculous moment, you want to call out, "Hey," want to just pretend we fought really hard and then go grab a drink. But alas, there's no tavern escape route carved into the walls of the Colosseum. The crowd begins its rhythmic chant low at first, then rising, pushing you forward. Every movement you make is amplified, every step echoing louder than it should. Your first clash comes fast. The wooden swords collide with a hollow crack, sending vibrations up your arms. The sound earns cheers, as if the audience has just been handed their opening act. You realize quickly that the real skill isn't just about landing blows, but about looking convincing enough to thrill the crowd. Congratulations, now in ancient Rome's most dangerous improv class, between strikes. You steal a glance at the audience. Children lean over railings, eyes wide with excitement. Merchants wave cloths, selling drinks and snacks to keep spectators refreshed. Some nobles recline under shaded awnings, fanning themselves, barely watching. You're sweating your soul out in the dirt, and someone up there is debating whether their wine needs more honey. It's a humbling reminder that entertainment is often built on someone else's misery. Still, there's a strange energy in this moment. You sense the possibility of fame lingering like heat in the air. One day, if you survive enough fights, people might chant your name instead of rookie. They might paint your image on pottery or compose songs about your victories. But for now, you're just trying not to trip over your own sandals while a crowd of 30,000 critiques your footwork. The duel drags on, sweat stinging your eyes, your chest heaving. Every cheer fuels you, but every stumble weighs heavier. You hear laughter from somewhere in the stands when your sword misses and hits the sand instead. Great your big debut, and you've already become slapstick comedy. You promise yourself you'll find that section of the crowd later and glare at them, assuming you're still alive. When the fight finally ends, not with blood but with exhaustion, you drop to one knee, panting, your limbs trembling from the effort. The crowd erupts, some cheering, some jeering, but all engaged. And that, you realize, is the true purpose of today. You've been tested not on your ability to kill, but on your ability to hold the gaze of an empire. As you stumble back toward the shadow of the gates, the noise fading behind you, you feel a mix of relief and dread. Relief that you survived your first steps into the arena. Dread because you know this was only the beginning. Today's bout may have been staged, but tomorrow's might not be. The sand will demand more than sweat, it will demand blood. Barracks will welcome you again tonight, filled with gossip and rough laughter. But when you lie down on your straw bed, you'll carry the sound of that crowd with you, their voices a chorus you cannot escape, and in your heart, you know that your life has shifted. You've taken the first steps into the arena, and nothing beyond those gates will ever feel the same again. The sand clings to your feet as you step out once again. This time under a hotter sun, the crowd louder than you remembered. Yesterday you were a trembling novice, stumbling through your first staged duel, but today the stakes have shifted. The murmur in the air is different, less forgiving, more eager. You can feel it in your chest, the pulse of thousands demanding, not just a show, but blood. The phrase blood and sand isn't just poetic, it's a daily forecast. Everyone knows that gladiatorial games mixed spectacle with savagery. Sometimes matches were carefully rehearsed duels, choreographed like deadly dancers. The swords would clash with sparks, the fighters would grunt convincingly, but the intention was more theatre than murder. If both men survived and looked impressive, the crowd left happy, their appetite for excitement sated. You could think of it as the ancient version of professional wrestling, just with a much higher chance of losing a limb. But not every day was so kind. Other matches turned into brutal fights where survival hung by a thread. Steel bit into flesh, sand soaked red, and the audience leaned forward in hungry silence to see who would rise again. You realize quickly that the games are unpredictable by design. The uncertainty itself was part of the entertainment. Nobody wanted to buy bread and sit in the sun just to watch two men pretend to tap each other with sticks. They wanted the possibility of death lingering like incense over the arena. What most people don't know, though, is that not all deaths were spontaneous. In some cases, the outcome was prearranged. Fighters too unpopular, too rebellious, or simply too injured to continue their careers were thrown into hopeless matches, essentially sacrifices in the name of crowd satisfaction. Some historians even suggest that certain gladiators were nudged toward bad luck. Fights if they angered their Lannister or refused to play the part of obedient entertainers. Imagine your boss at work deciding you need career development, and then handing you a trident against 3 armored veterans. Talk about a rough performance review. Historians still debate whether these spectacles leaned more toward theatre or actual carnage. Were most fights carefully moderated with rules and referees keeping things fair, or were they wild free-for-alls where the stronger man always triumphed? The truth likely lay somewhere in between, shifting from one event to another depending on the crowd, the emperor, and the mood of the moment. The sound of the audience swells as you face your opponent. He's larger, scarred, his armor heavier than yours. You tell yourself this is still a show, still a performance. But when his blade whistles past your ear, close enough to ruffle your hair, you wonder if anyone bothered to give him the memo. About acting, your wooden practice sword from training feels like a fond memory now. In your hand gleams real iron, and real iron has no patience for mistakes. The clash begins. Metal crashes against metal, echoing off the stone walls. The crowd erupts at every strike, their voices rising in waves. You feel your arms shake from the impact, your lungs straining in the hot air. At one point you stumble, and a cheer surges through the audience, not for your skill, but for your vulnerability. You realize, with an uneasy twist in your stomach, that the people above want drama more than justice. Survival is entertainment, but so is death. Between exchanges, you notice details you didn't before. The referee in the center holds a staff, his eyes darting nervously, ready to intervene if the fight crosses an invisible line. Musicians in the stands play a sharp rhythm, drums that speed up with the action, like a soundtrack to your potential demise. Vendors shout over the chaos, selling snacks to spectators who sip wine while you're one bad step away from bleeding out. There's something both horrifying and absurd about it. You're choking on dust, and someone in the upper rows is complaining that their figs aren't fresh. Your opponent presses harder, and instinct takes over. You block, you lunge, you scrape by with desperate moves. The crowd cheers louder at each close call. Somewhere inside, you recognize that you're not just fighting him, you're fighting for the audience's attention. If they see courage, style, even defiance, they might cry out for your mercy should you fall. If they see cowardice, the sand will claim you, and the crowd will clap as if watching the end of a play. The fight drags on, both of you heaving, sweat and grit mingling on your skin. There's a moment, just a flicker, when you nearly trip, and for an instant you imagine how the world would look sideways, the arena spinning above you. But you catch yourself, push back, and hear the audience roar at your resilience. Strange, isn't it? They don't know your name, your story, your fears, but for this fleeting moment, you're their favorite toy. A final strike lands. The referee steps between you and the match ends. You're battered but standing, alive enough to leave the sand under your own power. The cheers follow you, mingling with boos from those who wanted more blood. Either way, you've survived another day in the theater of dust and death. You've learned what the arena truly is. Not a battlefield, but a stage where the script is written in sweat and sharpened steel. As you retreat into the cool shadows of the gate, your heart still hammering, you wonder what awaits next. Will tomorrow bring another duel, another test, or perhaps something stranger, animals, spectacles, or even executions designed to blur the line between justice and entertainment? The sand has tasted enough already, but it is never satisfied for long. The sand still crunches beneath your sandals as you step back into the light. Though this time your eyes don't focus on your opponent, but on the thousands who watch you. From above, you've already learned how uncertain every clash can be. But now comes the part that feels even more unnerving: the judgment. Survival in the arena is not simply about your skill with the blade, but about the whim of a crowd that roars like the sea, and the hand of an emperor who can silence your story with a twitch of his thumb. Everyone has heard the image, the emperor leaning forward, the arena hushed, and a thumb raised or lowered to decide life or death. It's the kind of drama that sticks in the imagination. One flick, and you might be celebrating in the barracks tonight. Another, and you're sprawled on the sand, your name forgotten before the next round begins. It's a chilling thought. All your sweat and pain can come down to someone's finger muscles. But what most people don't know is that the crowd itself often played a more important role than the emperor's gesture. Thousands of voices could thunder in unison, demanding mercy or blood, and emperors, despite their divine status, were still politicians. A ruler who ignored the will of the mob too often risked their love turning sour. You may think of it like a modern talent show. Sure, the judges sit in fancy chairs, but if the audience starts booing, no one's career is safe. Historians still debate the exact meaning of the emperor's thumb. Was a downward thumb truly the sign for death, as Hollywood loves to show? Or was it the opposite? Thumbs down meant sheath your sword, while a turned thumb upward symbolized a blade piercing toward the heart. The gestures remain a mystery, and perhaps that's the point. Ambiguity made the moment more theatrical, more charged. For you, though standing in the arena with sweat dripping down your temples, it feels less like art and more like a gamble with terrible odds. The noise is deafening. Some shout for your opponent's life, others howl for his end. The voices clash and merge into one storm that rolls through your chest. You look upward, trying to catch the emperor's gaze. He sits, shaded, surrounded by advisors and attendants, sipping wine as though this were just a casual afternoon diversion. It's hard not to notice how different your worlds are. You, bleeding under the sun, he lounging with grapes. You're the reality TV contestant. He's the board executive producer, deciding whether you're renewed for another season. You kneel, or at least lower your weapon, because that's what's expected. Submission to the decision. You don't control what comes next. Not entirely. Your opponent gasps nearby, perhaps wounded, perhaps just drained. The audience keeps chanting, "Kill, kill," followed quickly by "Spare him." The contradiction is dizzying, and you wonder if the crowd even knows what it wants or just enjoys the power of shouting. Maybe both. One lesser-known fact. Sometimes the fate of a gladiator wasn't determined in the heat of the moment at all. Fighters with wealthy patrons in the stands often had their lives spared, regardless of the crowd's mood. If a noble had invested in you or simply liked your style, their influence could outweigh thousands of voices. So yes, you might train for years and risk your life daily, but the real key to survival might just be impressing the right rich guy with your sword twirl. Networking, ancient Rome style. As the emperor finally gestures, an ambiguous twist of the risk that you pray means let him live. The tension bursts like a dam. The crowd reacts instantly, cheers rolling like thunder. Relief washes over you, though it feels strange, knowing that it's not your skill alone that saved you, but the collective whim of strangers and a man in silk. Your fate has been entertainment. Your existence a coin tossed to keep the masses happy. The absurdity of it all almost makes you laugh. You risked your ribs being cracked open, and now the crowd is already distracted by the promise of the next bout. It's like being the opening act at a concert. You pour your soul into it, and everyone's just waiting for the main show. As you walk back through the tunnel, the noise fading behind you, you can't shake the feeling that you are both celebrated and disposable. A hero in the moment, forgotten by dinner. And yet, tomorrow, you'll step out again, because that's what gladiators do. But whispers reach you in the corridor, rumors of beasts waiting in the pens, lions brought from far-off lands, there, roars echoing faintly through the stone. If the crowd tires of men fighting men, they will demand something wilder, something that tests not just courage, but the very boundary between civilization and chaos. The cheers still echo faintly in your ears as you return to the dim barracks, but the sound feels different now, hollow, like laughter heard through a closed door. Out there, you are a name shouted by thousands, a warrior bathed in sunlight and applause. In here, you are simply another body stitched with scars, Another fighter who will one day limp too slowly to matter. The glamour of the arena fades fast when the torchlight hits the bruises on your ribs and the cut reopening on your arm. Fame, it seems, has an expiration date measured in broken bones. Everyone imagines gladiators as glamorous celebrities of Rome, and in a way, you are. People recognize your face, chant your name, and even carve crude graffiti in your honor on tavern walls. But here's the catch: your fan club doesn't pay your medical bills. The scars pile up, each one telling a story of survival that sounds heroic in retelling, but feels more like dull throbbing when you try to sleep on the hard wooden bench. A common truth: gladiators often lived with chronic pain. A twisted knee that never quite healed, a shoulder that clicked when raised, teeth lost not just in battle but in training accidents. You would think constant injuries might earn you a cushy retirement package, perhaps a villa, maybe a pension, but no, the best you could usually hope for was a wooden tablet declaring your freedom if you managed to survive long enough. A fancy certificate and your aching joints as souvenirs. Here's a lesser-known fact: some gladiators, even at the peak of fame, tried to hide their injuries from the lanista, fearing replacement. If the master noticed you were too slow, too stiff, you might lose your spot in the roster or worse. Be sent to fight a hopeless match as a way to squeeze the last bit of entertainment from you. So you learn to laugh through the pain, to wrap wounds tighter, to down the sour wine until the edge of suffering dulls. Imagine being a modern athlete who pretends their torn ligament is just a bruise so the coach won't bench them only. In this case, the bench is permanent, and it's 6 feet under. Historians still debate how gladiators coped with the psychological toll. Did they embrace their role as living symbols of Rome's power? Did they sink into despair behind closed doors? Or did some carve out small joys, friendship, love affairs, whispered jokes in the barracks that kept them human in a system designed to use them up? The evidence is hazy, but the scars in the stories suggest resilience and sorrow living side by side. You sit in the barracks tonight, pressing cloth to a cut, listening to the whispers around you. One fighter mutters about the pain in his hip, another worries about tomorrow's match. A third hums a tune softly, almost as if music could push away the weight of mortality. The air is heavy with sweat, vinegar, and the faint metallic temps of blood. It doesn't smell like glory. It smells like exhaustion. The joke, if you can call it that, is that the very scars that ache so much in private are what make you admired in public. The crowd loves a fighter marked by battle. The limp, the missing ear, the jagged scar across the cheek, they turn you into a living canvas of violence. You don't feel like a hero when your shoulder locks up, but to the crowd, you're the man who fought the lion and lived. Congratulations, your dislocated arm is now a brand. Sometimes, the weight of it all is absurd. You imagine explaining your job to someone from the future. Yes, I get repeatedly stabbed for people's entertainment, and when I survive, they throw me a few coins and a loaf of bread. Sounds less like a profession and more like a prank. Gone too far. And yet, you keep stepping into the sand, because what else is there? You're bound to the life until death or rare freedom. Another little-known twist: some gladiators used makeup or herbal salves to conceal their wounds before appearances outside the arena. It wasn't vanity, it was survival of reputation. If the public saw you limping in the street, your aura of invincibility cracked. In a world that worshipped strength, showing weakness could make the difference between being adored and being discarded. So yes, the barley men also sometimes dabbled in cosmetics. Call it ancient influencer culture. The scars remind you of everything taken and everything left behind. You long for ordinary comforts, walking without pain, eating without the metallic taste of blood in your mouth, sleeping without fear of nightmares, replaying each fight. But ordinary is not a luxury granted to you, and yet tomorrow you will. Rise again, strap on the armor, and play the part, because that's the bargain. The fame is addictive, even as it eats you alive. The crowd will cheer, the emperor will sip his wine, and you will bleed in a way that seems glorious from a distance. But for now, sitting in the flickering light, you let your eyes close, knowing that behind the mask of glory, you're simply tired, aching, scarred, and waiting. Because soon, the games will grow even stranger, and it won't just be men you face in the arena. The sound of distant roars reminds you, beasts wait in the shadows, and tomorrow the sand may not only taste of sweat and blood, but of something far wilder. The barracks whisper of tomorrow's spectacle, but this time the talk is different. You fought men, beasts, and exhaustion itself, but now the rumor is about women stepping into the sand. Female gladiators, rare, exotic, and guaranteed to make the crowd lose its collective mind. You'd think Rome had seen it all, but the sight of a woman armed with sword and shield still manages to jolt even the most jaded spectators out of their wine-soaked stupor. The Colosseum is about to get a twist that no playwright could improve upon. The common story everyone knows. Yes, women did fight in the arena, though not as often as the men. They were called gladiatresses, and when they appeared, it was as much about the shock value as the skill. Imagine the hush of the crowd turning into thunder when a woman in tunic and armor steps out, her hair bound tight, her expression calm but electric with focus. You might have thought you'd seen every spectacle the games could offer. But here, gender itself becomes part of the theater. And yet, here's a fact most people don't realize. Sometimes these women were pitted against wild animals, lions, leopards, even bears. Not always to the death, though the crowd probably wouldn't mind if it turned bloody. The match itself was theater with layers of social meaning. Rome showing off not just its power over men and beasts, but even over the unexpected ferocity of women. It was less about fairness and more about a message. See, even women can be broken by Rome. The irony, of course, is that sometimes the women won, and the message got a little scrambled. Historians still debate how widespread these female fights actually were. Some argue they were rare novelties, one-off amusements staged for emperors, showing off. Others suspect they might have been more common than we think, just less documented because, well, Roman writers weren't exactly rushing to celebrate women with swords. After all, nothing undermines the fragile ego of an empire built on masculinity like a woman winning. A fight in front of 50,000 people. The spectacle you imagine is almost cinematic. You walk out into the blinding sun of the arena, but the roar that greets you is sharper this time. Not just admiration, it's shock, curiosity, even scandal. The crowd murmurs, a woman, fighting. Some cheer wildly, others scoff, but every eye is fixed on the sand. The emperor leans forward, suddenly, more attentive. He's not just watching a contest. He's watching Rome's values being poked with a sharp stick. There's a dark humor in it. The same audience that insists women stay modest and quiet suddenly can't get enough of them wielding axes and nets. It's as if society says, don't speak too loudly at dinner, but please decapitate this barbarian in front of us, thanks. You can't help but laugh at the hypocrisy. And let's be honest, A woman defeats a snarling leopard with a spear. She's earned the right to talk as loudly as she wants at dinner. Of course, the fights weren't fair. The armor given to female gladiators was often lighter, sometimes deliberately more revealing, turning their danger into a spectacle layered with voyeurism. They weren't just fighters, they were entertainment twice over, warriors and curiosities at the same time. It's uncomfortable, but then again, so is most of Roman society if you peel back the marble facade. Yet you can't deny the charisma. They carried. Step into their sandals for a moment. You know the crowd doubts you, expects you to falter, to fall quickly. And when you don't, when your blade parries and your body moves with trained precision, the shock ripples through the audience like a wave. Suddenly, it's not just novelty, it's respect. The gasp when you land a blow is almost sweeter than applause. Another joke lies in the logistics. Imagine the conversations backstage. Yes, tomorrow you're on at noon, right after the acrobats, before the lions, no pressure. Or picture the gossip in Rome's taverns. Did you hear about that woman who beat 2 men in the arena? My wife wants sword lessons now. I'm doomed. The tension between fame and danger was the same for female gladiators as it was for you. The crowd adored them, at least in the moment, but adoration never guaranteed survival. Each step onto the sand was still a gamble, whether you wore a tunic or a toga, whether your body carried scars hidden beneath hair or beard, or none at all. And at the end of the day, once the crowd dispersed and the torches guttered out, these women returned to the same cramped quarters, the same bruises and exhaustion. Glory was a mask they wore for the audience, but underneath they were just as human as any fighter who collapsed into sleep with aching muscles and too many thoughts to silence. You sit in the barracks now, still hearing the echoes of their battles in your mind. Tomorrow you may share the arena with them, or face beasts yourself. Rome never runs out of ways to remind you that the games are not just about skill, but about surprise, or with another twist, another spectacle. And so, as night falls, you wonder what waits next. The sand has soaked up the sweat of men and women alike, and tomorrow it will drink again. For now, you close your eyes, knowing that when the gates open again, the spectacle will only grow more ferocious and more unpredictable. The sand crunches beneath your feet, but this time the sound is drowned out by a different kind of roar. Not the crowd, not yet, but something deeper, more primal, rattling your ribs before you even see it. The gate creaks open, chains clatter, and there it is, a lion, mane shimmering in the sun. Eyes fixed on you as though you're the unlucky main course on Rome's buffet menu. Welcome to the Venatio, the staged animal hunts of the arena, where exotic beasts are dragged across continents, just to terrify you and delight the masses. Everyone knows the image, gladiators facing lions. It's so ingrained in imagination that it almost feels cliché, like movie posters or over-the-top TV reenactments. But the truth is, these battles were more than mere entertainment. They were a symbol of Rome's power. What better way to say we control the world than by tossing a Nubian leopard or Syrian bear into a ring and proving that even nature itself bows to Roman order, or at least to Roman cages. Here's something less known. Though sometimes the animals were drugged or deliberately starved before release. That way, the show was better, either more frantic or more sluggish, depending on what effect the organizers wanted. Imagine that detail as you stand there, wooden spear in your trembling hand, wondering whether the lion pacing before you is actually drunk on poppy fumes. It's the kind of fact that makes you realize these spectacles weren't just about bravery, they were about control, manipulation, and theater, and yet, historians still debate how often gladiators actually fought animals. Some argue it was mostly specialized fighters, bestiarii, trained just for beast combat. Others believe regular gladiators like you could be tossed in whenever the schedule needed a little extra flair. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. But that doesn't make the idea of squaring up against a rhinoceros any less absurd. Yes, they did import rhinos. No, your little trident isn't going to cut it. Picture the scene. You step forward. The crowd leans in, and the emperor waves casually from his shaded seat as if watching people fight elephants is just another lazy Sunday. The animal snarls, the crowd gasps, and you wonder whether your will to live or your ability to run faster than your comrades will win the day. Spoiler, running doesn't usually work. The arena is designed to keep you in, and the beasts know it now. Let's pause for a joke, because honestly, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. They say dogs are man's best friend, but here, in Rome, that friendship doesn't extend to the wolves released into the arena. And cats, forget about it. You thought the neighbor's house cat was vicious. Try one the size of a sofa. Suddenly, scooping a litter box doesn't sound so bad, does it? The irony, of course, is that the audience wasn't always on your side. Sometimes they rooted for the animals, hoping the beast would maul you for the thrill of it. Other times, they booed when the lion died too quickly, as though you'd ruined their afternoon entertainment by being too efficient. You can almost hear the complaints, "I paid good denarii for this. At least let the bear swipe him a few times." No pressure, right? There's another darker layer. Exotic animals weren't just hunted for spectacle. They were a demonstration of empire. Every lion, every ostrich, every crocodile dragged into Rome was proof that the empire stretched wide enough to capture anything. The sheer logistics were staggering: ships full of cages, handlers risking their lives, thousands of creatures transported only to die on Roman sand. It's like the worst zoo trip in history, except nobody's going home with souvenir postcards. Imagine yourself standing under the blazing sun, sweat running down your spine, while a panther circles you with lazy grace. The crowd chants, children shriek in delight, vendors hawk figs and wine, and you grip your spear tighter knowing it won't save you. This isn't about fairness. It never was. It's about spectacle, about Rome proving its dominance over both man and beast, while you, the unlucky performer, dance on the edge of survival. Let's slip in another bit of humor, because you need it now. Think of this as the worst pet adoption program ever. Congratulations, you've been chosen to bond with a hyena. Step into the arena. Or maybe picture the animal trainers trying to explain to their families what they do for a living. Yes, honey, I wrangle elephants and shove them toward terrified men with spears. Yes, the retirement plan is terrible. Still, not every fight ended the way Rome expected. There are tales of animals breaking free, leaping into the stands, scattering nobles in a frenzy. Suddenly, the carefully staged drama turns chaotic, and the audience gets more participation than they bargained for. For one brief, delicious moment, the line between spectator and spectacle dissolves, and everyone is reminded that nature is not so easily tamed. The day winds down, blood on the sand beasts, yours or both. The cages are dragged shut again, handlers poking at restless lions with iron prods, while the crowd filters out, chattering about the highlights. For you, though, the adrenaline doesn't fade so easily. You sit later in the barracks' hands, still trembling, the echo of roars in your ears. You survived this time, but tomorrow, who knows? Rome always wants more, always hungers for the next display, the next gasp, the next cheer, and as the torches dim, you close your eyes, knowing that the arena still waits, and that the sand under your feet is never dry, it's soaked with the weight of every creature, human or beast, forced to dance for Rome's endless appetite. Section 13. The sand is brushed clean. The animals dragged away, and yet you remain breathing, bleeding perhaps, but alive. And in Rome, that means something. Survival itself is a currency, and tonight you've just earned a little more than another bowl of barley and beans. You've tasted the strange alchemy of fame. The crowd roared your name, garlands were tossed at your feet, and for a brief, surreal moment, you weren't a slave or a pawn, you were the center of Rome's vast attention. It's a strange paradox, isn't it? The very city that cages you also lifts you up like a hero. A victorious gladiator can become a celebrity, adored across Rome. People whisper your name in taverns, scribble graffiti of your face on walls, and cheer when you pass in the marketplace. Yes, graffiti. Forget TikTok and fan clubs. You got crude sketches of yourself drawn in charcoal on the corner of some public bathhouse. Not exactly glamorous, but hey, fame is fame. Everyone knows the broad strokes. Win enough matches, and you can earn not just riches, but freedom. The wooden sword, the rudis, is placed in your hand by an emperor or lanista, and suddenly you are no longer property. That's the iconic scene, Gladiator turned free man, the crowd erupting with joy. But here's a lesser-known fact. Some fighters refused freedom. That's right, they chose to stay in the arena. Why? Because the money, the adoration, the intoxicating feeling of being cheered instead of jeered at was addictive. Imagine surviving the worst internship of your life, finally getting offered a way out, and saying, actually, I'll just stick around for the applause. The gifts could be staggering. Purses of gold, villas in the countryside, even the attentions of wealthy Roman women or men who adored the thrill of bedding a champion. That scar across your chest, suddenly it's not a reminder of terror, but a badge of rugged appeal. Rome loved a man with a good story carved into his skin, and you're a walking epic poem. But of course, not everything was so straightforward. Historians still debate just how often gladiators truly became rich and free. Were those tales the rule, or were they carefully polished exceptions, dangled in front of fighters to keep them lunging forward into danger? It's one thing to know that a handful of men made it out with wealth and honor. It's another to realize that thousands more bled and died in obscurity. Rome was good at selling dreams, and maybe your dream is part of that well-oiled illusion. Still, while you're alive, you get to bask in it. Picture yourself striding through a crowded street, people parting for you, children tugging at your tunic, begging to touch your hand. Vendors press free figs into your palm, hoping the great champion will remember their stall. Soldiers nod with respect, senators pretend not to stare, and even the emperor might raise a cup in your honor. For a fleeting moment, the gulf between slave and citizen blurs, and you, drenched in sweat and scars, stand taller than men who were born free. Let's slide in a little joke here, because otherwise this is getting too shiny. Fame comes with its quirks. Maybe you're offered free drinks at a tavern gratin till you realize the owner just wants to brag. Yes, this is where he after too much sour wine, or maybe an overeager fan carves your name into their arm with a stylus, and you think, wow, flattering, but also, please, get a hobby. Fame in Rome didn't come with PR managers. You just had to smile, awkwardly, and hope the stalkers weren't armed. There's another darker irony. The same crowd that lifts you up will turn in an instant. One bad fight, one moment of cowardice, and the cheers become jeers. They don't care that you fought with a broken rib or that your opponent had armor twice as thick. To them, you're only as good as your last spectacle. Rome's love is a fickle lover, demanding and cruel, yet impossible to resist. You can almost hear the gossip already. Yes, he won yesterday, but did you see him stumble? He's finished. The same mouths that once sang your praises now mock your hesitation. And yet, fame tastes sweet. You feel it even back in the barracks. When your fellow fighters glance at you differently, jealousy lingers in the air like smoke, but also respect. They may gossip, but they can't deny it. You've crossed a threshold. You're no longer just another body waiting to fall. You're something rarer, a spark that caught Rome's attention, however briefly. And now, a lighter note. Imagine the merchandise. If Rome had marketing the way we do now, your face would be slapped on clay mugs, dice, or maybe a line of tunics in the latest shade of saffron. Kids would trade wax tablets with your likeness like baseball cards. I'll swap you to generic Mamillos for one limited edition champion of the Colosseum. Maybe it's better they stuck to graffiti less embarrassing as night falls. You lie awake, listening to the faint snores of men who may envy or despise you. Your muscles ache, your scars itch, but your mind hums with the echo of applause. For now, you're more than a fighter. You're a symbol of strength, resilience, survival. You're the walking embodiment of Rome's obsession with glory, and its cruel indifference to those who fail to capture it. And even as you drift toward uneasy rest, you know tomorrow could take it all away. Fame is fragile, fortune fickle, and freedom, well, it's always just one fight further. But tonight, you close your eyes and let yourself believe you've become more than Rome ever intended you to be. The sand still clings to your skin. The roar of the crowd still echoes in your ears, but something in the air feels different now. Rome itself seems to shift beneath your feet, its empire stretching, straining, and slowly unraveling. The Colosseum, once the beating heart of spectacle, doesn't feel quite as eternal as everyone once believed. You sense it in the thinning crowds, in the whispers of senators counting coins instead of cheering fights. You know the familiar story. The games were expensive, jaw-droppingly so. Feeding wild animals, importing exotic beasts from across Africa and Asia, building and maintaining massive amphitheaters, none of it came cheap. Emperors once used this extravagance as proof of their power, a way to dazzle the people with lions and leopards while quietly hiding the cracks in politics. But as time moved on, the empire had bigger problems: invasions, economic troubles, and, well, the little issue of trying to govern a territory so vast it made Amazon Prime delivery look efficient, suddenly blowing the treasury on another round. Of elephants seemed less glamorous, and here's something fewer people know. By the later centuries, gladiatorial games weren't quite as central to Roman culture as they had been. Yes, they lingered, but often in smaller, less lavish forms. Some amphitheaters even started doubling as markets or gathering halls. Imagine strolling in, expecting a duel to the death, only to find a goat auction. That's one way to keep things lively, of course. The decline wasn't a straight line. Some emperors tried to revive the spectacle, hoping to relive the golden age of blood and sand. But the energy was fading. The crowd still cheered, but the frenzy wasn't the same. Maybe they had grown tired, or maybe they simply had other distractions. After all, when barbarian armies are knocking at the gates, watching two men stab each other feels a little less like must-see entertainment. The Christians also arrive on the stage of history, reshaping values, questioning the morality of the game's public taste begins to change. What once felt like divine ritual now begins to feel like cruelty. Not that Rome suddenly turned into a land of kindness far from it, but the cultural winds shifted. The idea of watching people die for fun slowly lost its shine. You can almost hear the grumbling of disappointed fans. First, they outlaw chariot crashes, now this. What's left? And yet, as with so much of history, nothing is perfectly clear. Some scholars argue the games ended abruptly with imperial bans, while others say they fizzled out gradually, lingering here and there in stubborn provinces. The truth is messy, as it usually is. Historians still debate whether the decline was driven more by economics, by morality, or simply by boredom. Personally, you suspect boredom played a part. People always crave novelty. And after centuries of men fighting beasts, maybe the audience just wanted something fresh. Netflix wasn't around yet, so the poor Romans had to make do, you think. Back to the glory days, you once tasted the cheers, the garlands, the coins tossed at your feet. And now, to picture the arena standing silent, weeds creeping up through the cracks of stone, feels almost eerie. The mighty Colosseum, where thousands screamed your name, now hosting pigeons and moss. It's like seeing your favorite nightclub turned into a storage unit. A little depressing, but also inevitable. Of course, decline has its comedy too. Imagine the awkwardness of the very last gladiatorial game, whenever it truly happened. The crowd is half empty, the emperor barely pays attention, and the gladiators are thinking, really? After all this? It ends like a school play no one wanted to attend. Not exactly the Hollywood send-off, but if you listen closely, you realize the echoes never vanish entirely. The spirit of spectacle lives on. Sports arenas, combat sports, the roar of the crowd, all of it is a distant descendant of the amphitheater. You see it every time a stadium erupts in cheers, every time fans paint their faces and chant in unison. It's the same human hunger for drama, for stories of victory and defeat, just repackaged with helmets and scoreboards instead of helmets and swords. And you, standing there in the shadow of this fading empire, feel the melancholy of endings. You were forged in fire and blood, celebrated as a symbol of Rome's grandeur. But even grandeur crumbles. Time moves on, people change, and the mighty spectacle of your life becomes a curious chapter in dusty scrolls. You can almost smile at the irony after all that sweat and struggle. Your greatest opponent isn't another gladiator, but history itself, slowly erasing the sand you fought on. Still, decline isn't just loss, it's transformation. The arenas don't vanish, they shift, carrying new purposes, new voices, new echoes. And though Rome's obsession with blood cools, the memory lingers, carried forward in legend, in whispered tales, in the stones that still stand tall, even as the empire collapses. And so you walk away, not just from the arena, but from an age. The games fade, the empire falters, but your journey isn't quite finished yet. There's still the matter of what happens after the roar has ended, when silence takes its place and the legacy of gladiators becomes memory. The crowd is gone now. No more deafening roars, no more emperor's thumb hovering like a god's coin. toss, just silence, deep and heavy, the kind that presses against your chest. You stand in the arena, but the sand no longer stirs beneath trampling feet. It lies still, as if it too has grown weary of blood and spectacle. What lingers is not noise, but whispers soft, invisible echoes of every shout, every clash, every breath stolen in the heat of battle. You can almost hear them if you close your eyes. The scrape of steel, the thud of a shield, the groan of the exhausted. The stones around you hold memory better than people do. They do not forget the thousands of matches, the desperate prayers, the fleeting cheers of victory. Even now, centuries later, when grass grows through the cracks and tourists shuffle with cameras, the arena hums with the faint aftertaste of its old life. You sense it like a lullaby carved into stone, rough and haunting. Of course, you wonder what happens to the gladiators after the noise ends. Fame fades quickly, scars last longer. Some win freedom, some slip into obscurity, many never make it out alive. Their stories scatter like sand in the wind, some told, most forgotten. The empire itself collapses, and yet these shadows endure. Isn't it strange? Entire cities crumble, but a story of two men fighting under the sun can outlive them all. There's a lesser-known truth here too. Not all gladiators hated their fate. Some embraced it, even found meaning in it. For a few, the arena wasn't just survival, it was identity. They weren't nameless slaves. They were champions, remembered while others vanished without trace. It's unsettling, but also oddly comforting that even in brutality, people could carve out dignity. And here's where the scholars still bicker across dusty desks. Was gladiatorial combat more entertainment, more ritual, or more politics in disguise? Was it about bloodlust, or about keeping restless citizens distracted? The debates swirl like echoes themselves, unresolved, and maybe they always will be. But in the end, does it matter? You only hear the whispers, not the verdict. You might smile a little at the thought. All that noise, all that chaos, all those sleepless nights of training and fighting, and it ends not with trumpets or triumph, but with silence. Maybe that's the ultimate joke. Rome spent centuries feeding lions and men to the sand, only for it all to become bedtime history. And here you are, listening to it, not in fear, but in comfort, drifting slowly into sleep. So let the images soften now. Let the clash of steel blur into a hum, the roar of the crowd into a hush, the heat of the sand into the cool weight of blankets around you. You no longer stand in the arena, you drift above it, watching it fade, turning from hard stone into a dreamscape where nothing hurts and everything rests. The arenas grow silent, but the whispers remain gentle and persistent, like the echo of a lullaby you didn't know you remembered. And you, weary fighter, finally let go. No weapons, no crowd, no emperor, just stillness and the slow embrace of sleep. So close your eyes. Let the weight of history settle into the background hum, softer and softer. The sand, the steel, the voices, they all fade, leaving only peace. Tonight, you don't fight. Tonight, you rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.